In 2016, Mel Gibson gifted the world with the magnificent film Hacksaw Ridge, about a soldier who, due to his religious beliefs as a Seventh-day Adventist, refused to even touch a weapon. Nevertheless, as a medic, this soldier brought enormous value to the American Army by saving more than 100 comrades, for which he was later personally awarded the Medal of Honor by President Truman. As we already know, Gibson considers himself more of an artist and often doesn't strive for complete historical accuracy in his films. In this video, I will tell you how the film differs from the real story of Desmond Doss. I will discuss which moments from the real story Gibson chose not to include because they would seem too unrealistic. Additionally, I will explain how, following Desmond's example, thousands of Seventh-day Adventists decided to enlist in the U.S. Army, only to be used as test subjects for chemical weapons. Desmond Doss was born in 1919 in Lynchburg, Virginia. From a very young age, Doss was instilled with a strong sense of faith. Although his father, a World War I veteran, was often drunk and disorderly, his mother was a deeply religious woman who regularly took her children to church. The film begins with a scene where a young Doss nearly kills his brother with a rock, after which he goes to a poster with the 10 Commandments and is captivated by the 6th commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." This scene is partially fictional. According to Desmond's younger brother Harold, they would often fool around together, but Harold never mentioned being hit in the head with a rock. Desmond's brother also recalled that Desmond was indeed fascinated by the 10 Commandments poster he saw at church, prompting their mother to ask the pastor for a copy to hang at home. Young Desmond would spend hours examining the details on this poster, particularly the illustration of the 6th commandment, depicting Cain killing his brother Abel. In reality, Desmond also had a sister in addition to his brother. From a young age, Desmond attended a Seventh-day Adventist school. Seventh-day Adventists believe in the second coming of Christ and strictly observe the Sabbath, in their religion Saturday, as a day of rest and worship. Additionally, the church encourages abstinence from meat, alcohol, cigarettes, coffee, and any products containing caffeine, for example, cola. The church recommends starting the day with cereal foods. Consequently, as you might guess, Adventists were known for their excellent health and endurance, but they often appeared quite thin. This is reflected in the film when Desmond outpaces all his comrades during physical training. Whether he was actually the most resilient in his unit or simply in good physical shape, I couldn't find any information. However, it's noteworthy that after Desmond's feats, the American Army became interested in Seventh-day Adventists, as most of them were indeed in excellent health. Desmond's example was very influential, and many Adventists were willing to serve their country, leading many to enlist as medics. However, the Army quickly found a more practical use for Seventh-day Adventists. In 1954, the White Coat program was launched. According to official documents, the program aimed to find a way to protect military personnel and civilians from biological weapons. In other words, various experiments were conducted on the subjects who were initially poisoned and then treated. The venue for these experiments was a sphere with a volume of 1 million liters. Once inside the sphere, subjects were placed in constructions resembling phone booths with rubber tubes leading to face masks. One test subject recalled never feeling so ill. Many subjects developed fevers reaching 106 degrees Fahrenheit, and one individual's gums swelled so much that he could no longer see his teeth. As soon as symptoms appeared, subjects were given antibiotics, and almost all recovered quickly and fully. However, the Army later claimed that no one was deceitfully lured into these experiments. Recruits were given documents detailing the potential consequences of the experiments. Some Seventh-day Adventists recalled officers telling them directly, "Guys, you are much more valuable to your country as guinea pigs than as cannon fodder." A total of about 2,200 Adventists participated in Operation White Coat, and many of them are still proud of their service, which led to the development of several vaccines and presumably provided extensive information on how biological weapons work in field conditions. If not for Desmond's heroism, many Seventh-day Adventists would never have joined the armed forces. After finishing the 8th grade at church school, Desmond sought work to support his family during the Great Depression. He went through various jobs before landing a position at a shipyard, where he serviced military ships, granting him a military deferment. Despite this, Doss felt a moral duty to serve. He believed that, as a medic, he could be like Christ, saving lives instead of taking them. In the movie, Desmond meets his future wife, a nurse at the hospital. To start a conversation with her, he volunteers to donate blood. His sister recalled that Desmond frequently donated blood in real life. Whenever he heard on the radio about an accident and a need for blood donations, he would walk 3 miles to the hospital and back. Interestingly, while the movie shows him being prohibited from donating blood 2 days in a row, his sister mentioned that Desmond often did this in reality, and the hospital staff did not object. However, Desmond actually met his future wife in church, not at the hospital. His wife, Dorothy Schuta, wasn't yet a nurse at that time. She earned her nursing degree after the war because Desmond, dealing with numerous injuries and disabilities, couldn't work full-time. Dorothy had to secure a well-paying job to support the family. When Desmond enlisted in the Army, his fellow soldiers, and especially the officers, were apprehensive about serving alongside someone who refused to handle weapons. In the film, Desmond experiences nightmares during training, reliving a pivotal moment from his life that cemented his vow never to touch a weapon again. He protected his mother from his drunken father by wresting a gun away from him, which nearly ended in tragedy. In reality, this incident was slightly different. One day, Desmond's father and uncle were drinking together. An argument broke out and his father pointed a gun at his uncle. Desmond, too young to intervene, watched as his mother stepped in, called the police, took the gun away, and told Desmond to hide it. Desmond believed his father would have killed his maternal uncle if his mother hadn't intervened. Later, Desmond would recount that, as he hid his father's gun, he swore it would be the last time he touched a weapon. However, this heartfelt story did not impress anyone in the Army. The film might give the impression that a mistake was made from the beginning by assigning Desmond to a rifle company against his wishes to become a medic, but in reality, it was no mistake.
I was just never supposed to be sent to a rifle company.
The leadership was immediately displeased with a soldier who refused to bear arms, and a decision was made to reform this problematic recruit through peer pressure and intimidation. Commanding officers planted doubts among Desmond's comrades, questioning his reliability in combat. How could they trust a soldier who refused to handle weapons? Moreover, nobody was thrilled that from Friday at sunset to Saturday sunset, Desmond dedicated himself to prayer. Some of his fellow soldiers saw it as a convenient way to avoid work. Desmond's captain threatened to send him to a tribunal if he continued requesting Saturdays off. One comrade even threatened to shoot Desmond on the battlefield. However, the true extent of harassment from his comrades is hard to verify now. Officer reports never mentioned Desmond being attacked at night. Desmond himself never spoke of such assaults in numerous interviews, but knowing Desmond, he likely turned the other cheek rather than inciting trouble with his comrades. Regarding the officers, it would be contradictory for them to instigate bullying against Desmond and then report it. We can only rely on recollections from his comrades. For instance, one of them recalled, he prayed at night and all that, and some guys would take off their shoes and throw them at him. He was constantly ridiculed. I don't think I could endure what this guy did. I don't think I could, but he held on there. He held on regardless of what they said or did. However, unlike in the film, there were officers who respected Desmond's wish not to handle weapons. Once, Captain Cunningham, who signed his discharge papers, argued with Desmond and told him that only men who participated in marksmanship training were allowed to enter the city. When Desmond explained that he did not need to handle weapons and that this was documented in his case, the captain began to humiliate him and even tried to force a rifle into his hands. Desmond refused to take the weapon and let it fall to the ground. The captain then threatened to send him to a military tribunal, but another officer intervened, reminding Cunningham to respect the directives clearly outlined in Desmond's case file. So in reality, Desmond was not immediately placed in a pre-trial detention cell until the military tribunal hearing. What distressed Desmond the most was not being allowed to see his wife. Contrary to the film, they were already married at that time. The final straw for Desmond was the denial of the opportunity to bid farewell to his brother Harold, who was on his last leave before deployment with the Navy. Desmond felt deeply saddened by the possibility that he might never see his brother again before he left. It was this issue that sparked the major conflict which led to Desmond's tribunal. The depiction of Desmond's tribunal in the film is also somewhat inaccurate. In the movie, much emphasis is placed on Desmond's father contacting his former commanding officer and asking him to write a letter in defense of his son. And it is after reading this letter that everyone in the courtroom allows Desmond to continue as a medic without undergoing combat training. In reality, Desmond's father contacted the chairman of the church's Military Service Commission in Washington. The chairman then called the regimental commander, Colonel Stephen S. Hamilton, to inquire whether he needed to come and investigate Desmond Doss's situation. The colonel replied that it was unnecessary and assured him they would handle everything. As it later emerged, all the officers in Desmond's regiment already understood that Desmond was entitled to serve as a medic without handling weapons. Initially, they had hoped to pressure him into resigning from service. However, once considerable attention began surrounding the case, individuals from Washington started taking an interest, and the matter quickly resolved itself. In the end, Desmond was given a 3-day pass to go home and see his brother Harold, before Harold returned to the Navy and went overseas. In the film, the combat scenes begin immediately in May 1945 on the island of Okinawa. However, in reality, Desmond's division went to war in the summer of 1944, and he served as a medic in Guam and the Philippines before reaching Okinawa. By then, his fellow soldiers had already begun to realize that Desmond was not as simple as they had initially thought. They discovered that this quiet, modest medic knew how to treat the blisters on their weary feet. If someone passed out from heat exhaustion, Desmond was there with his canteen. He never held a grudge and treated those who mistreated him with kindness and gentle courtesy. He lived by the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated. Even in Guam, he managed to save many of his comrades. When the cry "medic" rang out on the battlefield, he thought nothing of his own safety. By the time they reached Okinawa, Desmond was no longer an outcast. The opinion of his officers and fellow soldiers had changed. However, it was on Okinawa that Desmond performed the act of heroism for which he would later be awarded. The United States invaded Okinawa to use it as an air base for the planned invasion of mainland Japan. Japanese forces were deeply entrenched on the island, firing at American troops from caves and tunnels and setting numerous booby-trap mines. Desmond's battalion was ordered to scale the Maida Escarpment, which was heavily fortified by Japanese defenders. The Maida Escarpment, also known as Big Escarpment or Hacksaw Ridge, is a sheer cliff face about 40 feet high. The ridge is depicted in the film as more vertical and taller than it actually is in real life, probably for dramatic effect. The Japanese had been there for years and their fortifications were formidable. Before the assault, the task was to hang assault nets. Although this isn't shown in the film, Desmond Doss was one of the 3 volunteers who climbed the ridge and hung the assault nets. At the time of the assault on Okinawa, the war in Europe was about to end, with Germany's surrender imminent. American soldiers felt that the war was almost over and did not want to die in its final days. In contrast, the Japanese, cornered and desperate, resisted fiercely. Desmond's unit repeatedly attempted to capture the Maida Escarpment. After the sixth attempt, the high ground was taken, but the Americans were stunned when enemy forces suddenly launched a ferocious counterattack. Officers ordered an immediate retreat. Less than a third of the soldiers managed to descend. The rest lay wounded, scattered across enemy territory, left to die. Desmond defied orders and rushed back to save as many of his men as possible. As depicted in the film, the length of rope was insufficient for lowering the wounded according to the regulations Desmond was taught in boot camp. However, unlike in the movie, Desmond did not use the knot he was reprimanded for during training.
You were tying a bowline, boy, not building a bra.
Desmond himself explained, "I didn't have enough rope to do the job the way it should be done, and then the Lord reminded me of a knot I had learned as a boy in West Virginia." Many mystical events surrounded Desmond. Later, a Japanese sniper from Okinawa recounted how he had aimed at a medic, but each time he pulled the trigger, his weapon jammed as if some supernatural force prevented him from killing the medic. Desmond Doss estimated that he saved around 50 men that day, though his commander insisted it was at least 100. They agreed on 75. Between the time the main group retreated and when Doss finally left the ridge, 12 hours had passed. Astonishingly, he was rescuing about 6 men per hour. The final assault on the Maida Escarpment took place on the morning of May 5, 1945. That was a Saturday, which according to the Fourth Commandment should be devoted to prayer. Desmond, being the only medic left in the company, agreed to go, but asked for time to read his Bible first. The delay was approved by higher-ups, and the assault was indeed postponed until Desmond finished his prayer.
We're waiting, sir.
Waiting for what?
Private Doss to finish praying for us, sir.
The scene in the film where Doss slaps away and kicks a grenade, which many find unrealistic, did happen in reality, though it occurred 2 weeks after the capture of the ridge during the island's cleanup on May 21st. The events following the grenade explosion were even less believable, so Mel Gibson altered them slightly in the film. When the grenade exploded near Desmond, he was hit by 17 pieces of shrapnel. Desmond waited for 5 hours until his comrade Ralph Baker could reach him. Baker and a few others carried Desmond on a stretcher. While being carried, Desmond saw a severely wounded soldier on the ground. He rolled off the stretcher and crawled to tend to the wounded man. Desmond then gave up his stretcher and awaited further help. While waiting, Desmond was wounded again, this time by a sniper's bullet that shattered his left arm. He made a splint from a rifle stock and crawled the remaining 300 yards under fire, eventually reaching a safe medical station. By the way, the return of the Bible was also a little less realistic than in the movie. In reality, on May 31, 1945, while on a rescue ship, Desmond wrote to his wife saying he had lost his small Bible when he was wounded. It was the Bible his wife had given him before he left. "It was my main source of strength during the war and service. When I lost it, I was lost," Desmond later recounted. His company members learned of the Bible's loss, found it, and returned it to Desmond in the States. On October 12, 1945, Corporal Desmond Doss was personally awarded the Medal of Honor by President Harry Truman for his valor and bravery. After the war, Desmond's life was challenging. His injuries left him nearly disabled. He spent 5.5 years in hospitals before being discharged in August 1951. He lost 5 ribs and a lung due to tuberculosis, which he contracted in the Philippines and worsened in Okinawa. He received a military pension and antibiotics from the U.S. Armed Forces, but by 1976 he had become completely deaf from heavy antibiotic use. Desmond lived without hearing for 12 years until a surgery restored his hearing in 1988. Desmond Doss passed away at the age of 87 on March 23, 2006, after being hospitalized for breathing difficulties. He is buried at the National Cemetery in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Thank you for watching the video to the end. I hope you had a good time. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You'll discover plenty of other captivating videos waiting for you there.